I had always believed betrayal came with warnings, signs that flickered like dim red lights before a train crash. But when the call came, it hit me like a bullet through my morning coffee. It wasn't even her voice. It was a man's, polite, professional, and slightly apologetic. This was how negligence, unprofessionalism, and meddling in matters they had no business touching helped me uncover the truth. A very painful truth, one that lifts you to the heavens and slams you down with incredible speed. They wanted to do a good deed, but they didn't even realize the chain of events they had set in motion. I'm Mark Randall, 38 years old, a man who thrives on control, CEO of a global tech empire, a man with a meticulous routine and a relentless drive. To the outside world, I'm the quintessential success story. Fast cars, tailored suits, a family that graces the society pages with their perfect smiles. But as I've learned, the truth behind the curtain is rarely as polished. My wife, Emily, was the first and only woman to ever make me question myself. She's brilliance personified, the kind of woman who could sell ice to an Eskimo and make them feel like they got the better deal. We met at a business conference a decade ago when I was still clawing my way up, and she was already making waves in marketing. We were magnetic, equal parts passion and ambition, a power couple destined for greatness. But perfection has its price. The cracks began to form early, though we were too focused on building our empires to notice. Emily hated my work hours, claiming I cared more about the company than her. I resented the way she wielded that accusation like a weapon, as if her career didn't take her away just as often. And then there were the deeper scars, the kind we never spoke about in daylight. 5 years ago, we lost our first child, a miscarriage at 4 months. Emily withdrew into herself after that, pouring her energy into her career. I doubled down on mine, convinced that more success could somehow fill the void. We were grieving separately, but neither of us realized it. Our 2 children, Ella and Daniel, became the glue that held us together. Ella, 7, has Emily's sharp wit and my stubborn streak. Daniel, 4, is all mischief and charm. They're the bright spots in a marriage that's been running on fumes for years. From the outside, we were enviable. Inside, we were strangers orbiting the same house. And now, with one phone call, I wasn't sure if we'd ever been anything more. Emily and I were always opposites in ways that balanced us, or so I thought. I liked structure, predictability, and a life where things could be measured and controlled. Emily thrived on spontaneity, pushing boundaries, and living in the moment. It was part of what had attracted me to her initially. But over the years, those differences began to feel less like harmony and more like friction. She had a fascination with ideas that made me uncomfortable. It started innocently enough, conversations about societal norms or unconventional lifestyles. But there were moments when her enthusiasm left me questioning how far her curiosity went. Like the time we hosted a dinner party, and her closest friends dominated the conversation with their tales of open relationships and ethical non-monogamy. Her 2 best friends, Lauren and Olivia, had the kind of marriages I couldn't wrap my head around. They openly bragged about their hookups with other people, sometimes even trading notes on who was the most memorable. Emily didn't just listen. She actively joined the conversation, her eyes lighting up as she called it fascinating and refreshing. After they left that night, I told her how uncomfortable it made me. I'd always valued loyalty and commitment, and I didn't understand how she could entertain such ideas, even hypothetically. She laughed it off, saying I was being too uptight and judgmental, but her reaction left me uneasy. Then there were the small, unsettling incidents, pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet see clearly. One evening, I came home earlier than usual and found her in our bedroom, the laptop open. I thought nothing of it until I noticed the way she hurried to close it, her cheeks flushed. I didn't pry, but later, curiosity got the better of me. The browsing history told me everything. She'd been watching explicit videos, featuring 3 people. When I brought it up, she shrugged, brushing it off as just curiosity and nothing serious. But the nonchalance in her voice didn't sit right with me. I tried to let it go, but it became another crack in the foundation of our marriage. Another question I couldn't bring myself to ask. Her friends didn't help matters. Lauren, in particular, had a habit of pushing boundaries, especially when I was around. Once, at a barbecue, she cornered me in the kitchen while Emily was outside with the kids. Her compliments veered from casual to overtly suggestive, and when she leaned in too close, I made my escape. I told Emily about it that night, expecting her to be outraged or at least uncomfortable. Instead, she laughed, a little too easily, and said, "Well, Lauren's always been flirty. She's harmless." Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she added, "Besides, it might be fun. You, me, Lauren, and her husband. Just once." I froze, staring at her as though I'd misheard. She was joking. She had to be. But the glint in her eye told me she was only half kidding, and that was worse. I snapped at her, telling her I wasn't interested in entertaining anything so ridiculous. And she rolled her eyes, muttering something about how I could never loosen up. Moments like that stacked up over the years. Emily's flirtation with ideas and behaviors I wanted no part of. They didn't happen often, but they stayed with me, simmering beneath the surface of our marriage. Her enthusiasm for her friends' lifestyles and her casual attitude about boundaries made me question how aligned we really were. I didn't forbid her from seeing Lauren or Olivia, but I made it clear I didn't approve of their influence. Emily, of course, accused me of being controlling, and it became another sore point between us. I wanted to believe it was just her adventurous side, a harmless curiosity that wouldn't lead anywhere. But in hindsight, all the signs were there. I just wasn't ready to see them. Emily worked as the head of marketing for a prestigious firm that handled big-name clients and even bigger campaigns. It was the kind of job that demanded long hours, creativity under pressure, and occasionally late nights at the office. I had always respected her ambition and the work she put into her career. But as the years went by, those late nights became more frequent, and with them came a string of odd late-night calls. It wasn't unusual for Emily to be on her phone discussing strategies or deadlines. What struck me, though, was how often these calls came from one particular colleague, Ryan. She had mentioned him before, describing him as a sharp, driven account manager who had a knack for getting things done under pressure. At first, I thought nothing of it, but as the months passed, I began to notice patterns. Ryan would call her late in the evening, sometimes just as we were about to sit down for dinner or unwind after putting the kids to bed. I'm not the jealous type, but something about it gnawed at me. Maybe it was the frequency, or maybe it was the way she seemed almost defensive when I asked her about it. One night, after her phone buzzed at nearly 10 p.m., I couldn't keep quiet. "Ryan again?" I asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. Emily glanced at the screen and nodded. "Work stuff," she said, already swiping to answer the call. "Put it on speaker," I said, leaning back in my chair. She paused, her eyebrows raised, then shrugged. "Fine." The conversation was mundane. Ryan was asking about a presentation their boss wanted finalized for a client pitch the next morning. They discussed slide designs, branding elements, and a few minor changes the client had requested. I listened, my unease fading with every word. When the call ended, she turned to me with a wry smile. "Satisfied?" I nodded, feeling a little foolish. "Sorry, I don't know. It's late and you're always working. It gets to me sometimes." Her expression softened, and she placed a hand on my arm. "I get it, Mark, but I promise you, there's nothing to worry about." And for a while I believed her. I wanted to believe her. It had been another one of those nights. Emily working late at the office, prepping for a big pitch, or so she said. I was at home, the house silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of floorboards as I moved around. The kids were asleep, the day's chaos winding down, and I had just poured myself a drink when my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen, Emily. I smiled to myself, wondering if she'd forgotten something or was simply calling to say goodnight. "Hey," I said as I answered, expecting to hear her voice on the other end. Instead, I heard a man's voice, polite, professional, slightly apologetic. "Hello, is this Mr. Randall?" Your wife's phone was left behind in one of our rooms. I'm calling from the Grand Imperial Hotel. My grip on the phone tightened, the room seeming to close in around me. I'm sorry, what? I'm calling from the reception desk at the Grand Imperial Hotel, the man repeated. The housekeeping staff found your wife's phone in a room that checked out earlier today. We assumed you were with her and wanted to make sure you knew where it was. The words hit like a punch to the chest. I wasn't with her? I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a brief pause, and then the man said, "Oh, well, just so you know, it's here at the desk if you'd like to come and collect it." I thanked him curtly and ended the call, my mind already spinning. Emily wasn't supposed to be at a hotel. She was supposed to be at the office, working on that pitch she'd been stressing about all week. I replayed the receptionist's words in my head. We assumed you were with her, but I wasn't. My eyes fell to the bourbon on the table, untouched. The smooth amber liquid suddenly looked far less comforting. I sat down, phone still in hand, and stared at the call log, the word Emily glaring back at me like an accusation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. I knew that much. The receptionist's tone had been casual, almost friendly, completely unaware of the bomb he'd just dropped. He thought he was doing me a favor, helping a husband retrieve his wife's forgotten phone. But his good deed had ignited something far darker. Emily had lied to me. That much was clear. The question now was how deep that lie went, and what I was going to do about it. I drove to the Grand Imperial Hotel in silence, the city lights blurring as my mind raced. Emily's phone, the one she never let out of her sight, was sitting at the hotel reception. The polite receptionist had assumed I was with her, which only deepened the knot forming in my stomach. When I arrived, the man at the front desk handed me the phone without hesitation. "Your wife left this behind," he said with a practiced smile. "Our staff found it in room 426. "Thank you," I said, forcing my voice to remain even. The phone wasn't locked. Emily never locked her phone. She said it was because we had nothing to hide from each other. But as I tapped the screen, it didn't respond. The battery was dead. On the drive home, I held the phone tightly in my hand, glancing at it every now and then, as if I could will it to turn on. My mind offered explanations. Maybe there really was a work meeting at the hotel. Maybe she left her phone behind by accident. Maybe I was overthinking this. But I wasn't the kind of man to let things slide, and Emily knew that. When I got home, the house was dark and quiet. I plugged in her phone, letting it charge while I poured myself a drink and waited. She walked through the door an hour later, her hair slightly disheveled, her expression drawn. "Hey," she said, kicking off her heels and dropping her bag on the counter. "Long day."
I'm exhausted.
I stayed seated in the living room watching her closely. "You forgot your phone," I said evenly. She froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to notice. "Oh," she said, turning to look at me. "Where was it?" "At the Grand Imperial Hotel," I said, my eyes never leaving hers. Her lips parted, a flicker of something crossing her face before she composed herself. "Right. I had a meeting there earlier. Must have left it behind." "Room 426? I asked, my tone betraying nothing. She nodded, walking toward the kitchen. "Yeah, we rented a suite to go over the presentation. More comfortable than the office." I didn't reply, letting the silence stretch between us. She glanced over her shoulder, her movements a little too careful. "Mark, it's not a big deal. I was rushing to leave and probably forgot to grab it." "Right?" I said, taking a slow sip of my drink. "You should probably charge it. Battery was dead when I got it." "I'll take care of it tomorrow," she said quickly, waving me off as she headed upstairs. "I need a shower." I sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of water running upstairs. When her phone vibrated faintly on the counter, I walked over and picked it up. It had turned back on, the notifications flooding the screen. Most were work-related, but one stood out. A message from Mother. Tonight was amazing. Can't wait for the next one. I stared at the words, my chest tightening. Whatever explanations Emily might offer, this wasn't something I could ignore. I spent the next morning steeling myself for the inevitable. I'd replayed the scene in my head a dozen times. Emily sitting across from me as I calmly laid everything out. The phone call from the hotel. The room number. Mother's message. There'd be no dodging it, no vague explanations. She would have to tell me the truth. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. Just as I was about to confront her, the doorbell rang. Lauren and Olivia stood on the porch, their voices loud and animated as they swept into the house with bottles of wine and plans for an impromptu dinner. "Thought we'd surprise you guys," Lauren announced, her grin wide. Emily's relief at their arrival was palpable, and she threw herself into hostess mode, busying herself in the kitchen with snacks and drinks. I forced a smile, playing along as the evening unfolded. But the rage simmering inside me didn't dissipate. I spent the night watching Emily closely, studying every movement, every glance. She avoided my gaze, laughing a little too loudly at their jokes, her tension barely concealed. It wasn't until the second bottle of wine was opened that Lauren, in her usual carefree way, let something slip. "You know," she said, raising her glass toward Emily, "I have to say, I admire how free-spirited you've been lately. It's refreshing, really. Just embracing life, not letting anything hold you back." The words hung in the air, thick and loaded. Emily's smile faltered for a split second before she quickly recovered, sipping her wine and shooting Lauren a warning glance. I leaned forward, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Free-spirited, huh? What exactly do you mean by that, Lauren?" The room fell silent. Olivia's eyes darted between me and Emily, her discomfort evident. Lauren, realizing she'd said too much, hesitated, her cheerful demeanor fading. "Oh, you know," she trailed off, laughing nervously, "just living life to the fullest. Nothing wrong with that, right?" "Depends on what you mean by living life," I said, my tone cold and deliberate. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her smile now a thin, brittle line. "Mark, don't start." But it was too late. The anger I'd been holding back all night erupted. "Maybe Lauren can explain," I snapped, turning my glare on her. "What exactly has Emily been up to that's so refreshing?" Lauren stammered, her face flushed. "I didn't mean, look, I was just talking. I didn't mean anything by it." The tension was unbearable. Olivia cleared her throat, mumbling something about needing to leave early. Within minutes, both of them were out the door, their awkward goodbyes trailing behind them. When we were finally alone, I turned to Emily, my voice low but sharp. "No more lies. Who were you with at the hotel?" Emily didn't flinch. She didn't cry or plead or offer excuses. Instead, she stood there, her arms crossed, her tone calm and measured, as though she'd rehearsed this. "You shouldn't have answered my call, Mark. That's the real issue here." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "The real issue? Your phone was left behind in a hotel room, Emily. Room 426. With Mother texting you about an amazing night. You want to tell me again how this is my fault?" She sighed, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Mark, I still love you, but I'm not going to apologize for being human. People aren't meant to have just one partner forever. It's unrealistic. You can't expect me or anyone to suppress who they are." I stared at her, stunned into silence. She continued, her tone almost clinical. "Look, it's not about love. I love you, and I love our family. But that doesn't mean I can't explore other things. It's normal, Mark. It's human nature. You're the one clinging to outdated ideas." "So what?" I asked, my voice rising. "You expect me to just accept this? Pretend it's fine for you to sneak around and call it exploring? What about the kids? What happens to them?" They'll have happy parents, she said firmly. That's what matters. We can keep this between us. No one else needs to know. It doesn't have to change anything. I took a step closer, my fury barely contained. Who were you with at the hotel, Emily? She shook her head. That doesn't matter. It matters to me. Well, I'm not telling you, she said, her voice steely. Her refusal was the final straw. I leaned in, my voice cold and quiet. You think you're in control here, Emily? You're not. I'll find out. And when I do, you'll regret every second of it. For the first time, her calm facade cracked, and I saw the faintest flicker of fear in her eyes. The air in our home grew heavier with each passing day. Emily and I danced around each other like strangers forced into the same space, every glance charged with unspoken accusations. Our conversations were clipped, shallow exchanges that barely touched the surface of our lives. But beneath the calm exterior, I was unraveling. The betrayal gnawed at me, consuming every waking thought. At night, I lay in bed replaying her words, her refusal to admit who she had been with, her calm justification for shattering the vows we had built our lives on. Emily, for her part, seemed to believe she had gained the upper hand. She carried on with her days, smiling for the kids, going to work, and laughing too easily when she thought I wasn't paying attention. But I was paying attention. One evening, I noticed something odd. Emily's work laptop, usually glued to her side, was left unattended in the living room. The screen was dark, but the faint glow of an open document spilled through the corner of the lid. My heart pounded as I opened it, navigating through her files. Most were mundane spreadsheets, presentations, but then I found a folder buried under layers of subfolders. Its name was innocuous, personal. Inside were photos. Some were harmless, pictures of our kids, a few from vacations, but others made my blood run cold. Emily and Ryan. At a bar, their bodies too close for coworkers. In a park, his hand lingering on her back. And then there were the messages, screenshots of texts exchanged between them, the words seared into my memory. Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you. I feel alive when I'm with you. Let's make it happen again soon. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath ragged. That night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I could barely contain the storm brewing inside me. Emily chatted with the kids, her laughter grating against my nerves. I wanted to confront her then and there, but I couldn't bear for Ella and Daniel to see their mother through my eyes. The liar, the traitor. After the kids went to bed, I followed her into the living room. She barely looked at me as she sank into the couch, scrolling through her phone. You left your laptop open, I said, my voice low. Her fingers froze. Slowly, she raised her eyes to meet mine. And I found the photos, I said, stepping closer. And the messages. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. But it lasted only a moment before she masked it with defiance. You had no right to go through my things. I laughed bitterly. That's your defense? Privacy? Don't you dare talk to me about rights, Emily, when you've been sneaking around behind my back with him. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. I told you, Mark, this isn't about love. It's about freedom. About being true to ourselves. Freedom, I snapped. You call this freedom? Lying, sneaking around, humiliating me? That's what you think a healthy marriage looks like. She stood, her voice rising to match mine. What do you want me to say, Mark? That I'm sorry? That I regret it? I don't. I've been suffocating in this marriage, trying to be what you want, trying to live up to your impossible standards. For once, I wanted to feel alive. Her words struck like a whip, but they only fueled my fury. And you think I didn't notice? That I haven't tried? I've been here, Emily, holding this family together while you ran off chasing your freedom. She laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. You think you're perfect, don't you? Always the martyr, always the victim. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me instead of your precious business, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. The accusation hit hard, but I refused to let it show. "Don't you dare blame this on me," I said through gritted teeth. "You made this choice. You destroyed us." Her expression softened for a moment, as though she wanted to say something to diffuse the tension. But then her walls came back up, her face hard and unyielding. "It's done, Mark. We can't change it. But we can move forward, if you're willing to try."
Ich zerrte her, incredulous.
Move forward? With what? Your open relationship? Pretend nothing happened and share you with him? She didn't answer, her silence louder than any argument. I took a step back, my chest heaving. "This isn't over," I said coldly. "Not by a long shot." Emily didn't respond, her gaze steady but filled with unease. For the first time, I saw cracks in her armor, faint but undeniable. I told myself I'd had enough, that no further proof was necessary. But the anger, no, the need, to uncover the full truth burned too fiercely. Emily had already destroyed the foundation of our marriage, but part of me clung to the idea that things couldn't possibly get worse. Until they did. One Thursday morning, she left early, saying she had a long day of back-to-back meetings at work. I stayed home, feigning a meeting-free schedule, and waited an hour before following her. When I arrived near her office building, I parked a short distance away and waited. She walked up the sidewalk with a spring in her step I hadn't seen in months, wearing a dress that hugged her in ways that made my stomach turn. But it wasn't the dress that caught my attention. It was the two men walking beside her. Ryan, I recognized immediately, his smug grin impossible to miss. The second man, slightly older but equally well-dressed, was unfamiliar. As they reached the entrance to her office, I froze, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. She turned to Ryan first, smiling as she leaned in to kiss him. On the lips, couldn't believe it. My stomach churned as I told myself it was just a fleeting gesture, maybe even a joke. But then, before the second man walked away, she did the same thing to him. A second kiss, just as intimate. I watched as they disappeared inside the building, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, snapping a quick photo of the scene I just witnessed. This wasn't just an affair. It was something far worse, far more depraved. I stayed parked there for hours, waiting to see if there was more to uncover. Around lunchtime, they exited the building together and strolled to a nearby cafe. I followed them, keeping a safe distance, and watched through the window as they shared a meal, flirting openly, laughing, touching each other's arms. It was as though I didn't exist, as though the life we had built together, the home, the children, the memories, was nothing but a distant obligation she shed the moment I wasn't looking. When I finally drove home, my rage was no longer a flame but an inferno. This wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. And I knew I couldn't let it go unanswered. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but mine would be searing. I'd always prided myself on being a man of control, of calculated moves and meticulous planning. Now, I would use those skills to make sure Emily regretted every choice she'd made. Step 1 was subtle. I changed the passwords to all our shared accounts, banking, utilities, everything. Emily liked to joke that I was too controlling, but she never realized just how much control I really had. She wouldn't notice until it was too late, when her access to the comfortable life she took for granted was cut off completely. Step 2 was more public. I gathered every piece of evidence I'd collected. Photos of her with Ryan and the other man, screenshots of messages, the damning hotel receipt, and sent it anonymously to her workplace, to HR, to her boss, to every coworker she'd mentioned over the years. I didn't include a note. The evidence spoke for itself. Step 3 was the coup de grace. I waited for the perfect moment, one of the monthly dinners we hosted for our closest friends. Emily, blissfully unaware of what I'd done, had insisted we go ahead with the event as usual, as though nothing had changed. As the evening unfolded, I played the role of the gracious host, pouring wine and engaging in polite conversation. But as the main course was served, I stood and raised my glass for a toast. To my beautiful wife, Emily, I began, my voice steady and deliberate. She smiled at me, though her expression faltered when she saw the glint in my eyes. And to the men in her life, I continued, my tone sharpening. Ryan and, what was his name? Paul? The ones she's been sharing everything with, while I was here playing the fool. The room went silent. Gasps filled the air as I set down my glass and pulled out my phone, holding up one of the photos for everyone to see. Here's proof, in case anyone doubted. Emily's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled for words. You've been caught, I said coldly. Don't bother denying it. The guests quickly made their excuses and left, their awkward goodbyes punctuated by Emily's attempts to stop them. By the time the door closed behind the last of them, she turned to me, her face a mixture of fury and desperation. You had no right, she spat. No, Emily, I said, my voice low but deadly. You had no right. To me, to this marriage, to the life I built for us. I left her standing there, her words echoing behind me as I walked upstairs. Revenge wasn't sweet. It was bitter, burning through my veins. But at least now, she'd feel the same pain she had inflicted on me.